talk a little bit about, what, a reasonably sized funding source could do in terms of being able to accommodate the types of investments that we're talking about with the 3 corridors and also a corridor out west. We don't want to lose sight of that. And really what it would take regionally in order to pull off this system that we're sort of formulating in our heads as we move forward through this study and others. And so I moved on to pencil on URS grid paper a little bit. There's still a lot of questions to be answered, a lot of assumptions go into this. But the bottom line is it seems like a funding source with the yield of a half penny to 3/4 of a penny of sales tax region-wide. Another issue is that the governance districting that you're talking about with the RTA doesn't really match up to the municipal boundaries, so there's still some massaging on what our yields would look like in that geography. But in general, I think that there's enough horsepower regionally to pull this off, and just wanted to quickly go through some of the assumptions that I put through. It's not grid paper, it's actually a spreadsheet, but just sort of some of the assumptions that we put down on paper and sort of where that takes us, and some of the ideas that we've sort of begun to vet within the governance committee and will continue to do so, especially in the next phase where we're really talking about what funding sources might work regionally. That's really the next discussion, I think, for that committee to bring back to this group. First of all, if we're assuming that this RTA will be everything transit in the region, which is, I think, where the governance committee is kind of headed with this, they would assume, they may not assume operation necessarily, but they would assume funding of the existing transit systems. So pivoting off of Edmond, Norman, and the Oklahoma City systems, I added those systems into that, the O&M and the capital requirements for those systems into our cost with about a 40% increase in total bus service. So that would do a number of things. That would be preliminary service in our corridors potentially. It would be expanding some service into some of the other parts of the region. And then as you would implement these high capacity systems, you would reallocate those resources to feed our major investments, our high capacity transit corridors. So we put that assumption in there. We've assumed operation and future expansion of the streetcar. I have about $300 million investment for additional length, additional segments of streetcar in downtown Oklahoma City, with some operating costs associated with that. We're assuming 30 miles of commuter rail and 25 miles of bus rapid transit over the course of this plan. And this plan would be, over the next 30 to 35 years. So it takes a while to get all this implemented, and there's a lot of massaging you could do in this financial plan, moving investments around year to year that saves money here, pushes money in, allocates money across here. So that's, those are all major assumptions in this exercise. That's all in told, just in capital investment, about $2.6 billion. That is a very healthy system. Just put it into perspective, the Dallas system is about $5.4 billion. So it's about half the size of the Dallas system. You would accomplish it in by the end of the 30s, 2040 timeframe, it would be all built. We would move forward from there. I've assumed all of the operating and maintenance costs for these BRT and commuter rail systems. With that, I've added about 1.5% annual what we call ongoing capital maintenance. So that's just, you're going to build these things, you've got to maintain them. So I just put a variable in there, and the industry standard is about either 1.5% to 2% of your actual investment that you would spend annually to maintain that investment. So it's replacing rail ties, or if you got to do refurbishment early on vehicles or on a maintenance facility, those types of things. So just sort of catch all, and that's about the experience of most systems, about 1.5%. We've included annual fleet replacements and a midlife refurbishment for all rail vehicles. Rail vehicles last in the neighborhood of 20 to 25 years. So in year 15 after they've been purchased, I put in about $1 million per vehicle to refurb them. And that could be transmissions, it could be, you know, a number of different things, just to keep our system up and running. You know, next slide. Sort of looking at this on my own. I did assume quite a bit of bonding, but I do have some as-you-go payments in there to buy down those bonds before we put them into the market, so that we're not spending too much money on debt service, you know, in the outer years, just to kind of smooth things out. I used what I would call a mode-specific fare box recovery. Generally speaking, Rick, are you in about 15% range?
You'll run between 12 and 14.
Yeah, okay, so I bumped that up a little bit. So about 15% on local bus, 20% on streetcar, 25 to 30% on commuter rail, which is usually a little higher revenue generating type of, and about 20% on BRT, same as streetcar. So for every dollar of operating cost I put in the model, I put 20 cents into our fare box revenues. I increased 5307. I pivoted off of the existing 5307 revenue coming into the region right now. Also added fixed guideway modernization, which kicks in from FTA 7 years after a fixed guideway is put into operation. So it's a pretty modest amount, but and I put estimated in with exclamation points, because that is a real crapshoot in terms of what the feds are bringing to the table on in their formula funds. But we did add a little bit over the course of time for that. I brought in 5309, which is discretionary money from FTA for some of the bus replacements and the rail car refurbs. And then I assumed 33% new starts on these major investments on the out-year investments. So your first foray into commuter rail and your first foray into BRT, I assume no federal participation. Okay, so you're bonding for quite a bit of those facilities. But then in the out years, definitely on the streetcar, because I think the way the federal process is moving, those more compact, high ridership types of facilities compete a little better than the longer haul travel time savings types of projects, and we can talk about that. And then I took out all of the revenues currently being supplied these systems from the cities. So those go away if we were to kick in this revenue source. So if I do a half penny, this is uglier than it looks. The dark line, or this is not as ugly as it looks. The black line is the cost, excuse me. The black line is the costs in the out years, and then the revenues. I kept them all green just to kind of keep them nice and fuzzy, because remember, this is only in pencil, and we're certainly not saying that sales tax is the answer right now. It just seems like that's probably the one with most yield. And you can see that here in the outer years, it converges pretty nicely. So there's a lot of cash coming into our reserves that can smooth a little bit of that out. I believe if we were to move some of the investments around a little bit, that half penny is really close. It would be tight. You wouldn't be able to do anything else with it, but it's got a definite possibility. So if you go to the next one, I said, what if we brought in a vehicle registration fee of $10 throughout the region to sort of point that towards operating the system. I think the vehicle registration number starts at about one other major point. Sales tax kicking in 2016. So that was one major assumption that I put in that it would kick in. That's a pretty important one, sorry. And it is in my notes. I probably should be following them more closely. But if we added a $10 vehicle registration that in 2025, you can see that cost line didn't move. This is more than enough to cover this shortage right here. And if you brought that in to say pay for O&M type of thing, it doesn't cover all of O&M. I think it billed out See, we get the first two, the one commuter rail and one BRT, and you're at about 68 million in operating costs for the region. And then in the build-out year, after everything's built, it's in the $140 million range. So vehicle registration in 2025 kicks in with like 12 million. So it's not really covering all of O&M, but that would be one of the ways you could pull it in. But that's actually pretty clean. And, you know, it looks like, you know, it's a very healthy system financially. So I did one more, and this is with a 3/4 penny. And you can see we could do a lot more with our money. We could build the investments a lot sooner. And something we talked about in the committee meeting is you could do a LAP program, a local assistance program, where maybe you kick back some of these dollars in the early years back to the city to do transit-oriented support projects. You know, anything if they wanted to augment their station or do sidewalks or any of those things, you could do that, and that would be a way maybe to get some votes in a referendum that you're doing something other than transit with your dollars. But just for conversation, we put that in there. So I'll be happy to answer any questions. You know, again, we're not trying to make any decisions. This exercise was really just to look at how feasible this system that we're talking about is in the region, and I think in general, it's pretty feasible.
Brian, what the rate of increase did you use for sales tax going forward?
1.5%, which is really the population side of that calculation. I did not, all this is represented in 2013 existing dollars, so you could bump that percentage up if we were to escalate our costs as well, but it would be a wash. I mean, it wouldn't be too bad. I don't think so. But then we just use a 1.5% for. Did I say 2% or 1.5%? Yeah, 1.5% for the increase in sales tax.
Yes.
Where did your assumptions come for the 30 miles of commuter rail and the, I think, 25 miles?
Yeah, I assumed
transit?
60 miles, 60 million a mile for commuter rail, which is a little high. You probably do it a little less than that, but I wanted to make sure I covered vehicles with that and a maintenance facility for that system. And you're building, you know, stations, and that's supposed to be an all-inclusive number. And it's you know, reasonable. That's about what the experience is. You know, especially in the Southwest. I mean, if you were to meld like what Phoenix is spending versus what Dallas is spending versus what Houston spends, those types of things, it's in that ballpark. And then I assumed 25 million a mile for BRT, which could be a little higher depending on how aggressive you were with, you know, doing busways and things like that. But our alternatives moving, you know, from this point moving forward in the study aren't really full busway type operations. We've kind of mix and match those, and I think, you know, the 25 million is a decent number. When we get those costs, when we'll be developing costs, we'll roll those costs into this model and do the exercise again.
What's your region for the sales tax? I mean, how did you figure that?
It is a number of cities, and I can run through them if you'd like.
We've got the graphic in our package.
Oh, you do?
The
Yeah, it's the
governance.
I'm pretty sure it's a city. We didn't really have time to do a cross-check between those, but it's pretty close to that map. And it does go a little beyond the precinct idea that you have for the thing. So we'd have to ratchet that back. Probably puts a little pressure on the half penny.
Well, yeah, because what you have listed here, Norman goes way out beyond Thunderbird. So, I mean, did you do it by zip code?
We did it by municipal. So we took what each of these cities are generating in sales tax right now.
Okay.
So, but you assume most of that's coming from the retail
Yeah.
area, so it's in the urbanized portion mostly. But we'd have to ratchet them back to match up to the geography. And to be honest with you, I haven't figured out a method for doing that yet. We'll figure something out. We gotta find a conservative method for doing that.
Do these revenues, do they flow, are they collected by the city and then they flow through the?
Actually, I think they're collected by the state, and then they're
So they would be,
given back.
Yeah.
they would never make it to the city.
No.
I've been
OTC.
thinking about how that would happen. I think in the sales tax form that a business would fill out, you know, to deliver their sales tax to the state, there would be a box there that they would check to say whether or not they're in the district or not. And that's how this would all kind of go down. But I haven't, you know, that's just sitting here thinking about it on the drive up.
And we'd probably also be obligated to pay to the Oklahoma Tax Commission the fee that we pay as cities for the collection of those taxes, so that would be an expense also, but that's in the process of being cut in half.
Okay.
That fee.
Yeah, and I would imagine the legislation is for the transit authority is silent on that.
Correct.
So I don't know how that would apply to the transit authority.
But I don't know any other way to collect, since all of those taxes are being collected by that entity, I don't know another way to do it.
That gets back to my question. If the municipalities collected it as part of their existing agreements, and then it was, I don't know how.
Oh, I
that-
see what you're
I
saying.
don't know how that
Yeah.
impacts the politics, but the reality is they're not having to do more work, because they already have a setup to collect it. It's just a
Yes.
question of how it's accounted for and distributed.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, because sales tax has the best yield, and it is how most of the successful transit systems around the country are using that funding source. I mean, I hope everyone understands we haven't hammered home sales tax as the answer yet. It's obviously one of the answers, and it may not be just sales tax. It might, you know, the committee's talked about, you know, sort of a mixed bag of potential funding sources. I think as far as the legislation is concerned, it only allows the RTA to do sales tax up to 2%. And I would think it could be above and beyond what the city's doing. So it could be, you know, totally separate intake for the state to do. Obviously, we're getting close to that 9% number in a lot of these cities. That's going to be an issue. So maybe it's a combination of assigning, you know, sales tax to the RTA. I don't know, but that is going to be obviously a big political issue.
One question.
Yeah, sure.
Did you assume in the early years we have surplus, a return on investment?
No, that's not in there.
No return on
That's a good
investment?
point.
Okay.
I did take some of those dollars to do those pay-as-you-go. Like I drew down, like there was one investment in there, I don't remember which one, but I took $150 million out of cash reserve and paid down some of that debt so I didn't have to put so much into the bond. Yes, sir.
I understand we're still at the 60,000 foot level, but
Probably
just
higher.
in looking thinking about the MAPS program, I mean, lumping the operational and the capital improvements together, I'm wondering if there's the ability to, you know, you go for a full penny for a 10, 15-year run, but they at least know when it rolls off, and then at the same time, maybe a quarter of that stays in play, whatever that number is. But when you start doing a 3/4, and I don't know how long that graph keeps going, but
Forever.
yeah, I think that'll, it's just something to think about, how you might be able to separate those, but still package them in a way that's easy.
Well, and I think that was one of the ideas from the committee is finding some funding sources that would just do O&M and using sales tax or something a little bigger for the capital side. I guess the only thing is if you limit it to 15 years, that's all you're going to be able to bond for. So you've got to be able to put enough time in there so that you can pay off bonds on it in a reasonable amount. And I assumed 30-year bonds at 5%, which is probably with no playing around with principal payments or anything like that. So that's actually a pretty high dollar one. I mean, we could probably do better than that. Food for thought.
Any other thoughts on the capital versus the operations and splitting it up? Any opinions, other leaders?
I mean, I would have one. I mean, mean, does it make sense to do a scenario where we keep the current funding from the cities intact? And see how low we can go with the new funding? I thought like taking those out of the mix was a good thing for the cities, but,
I think that's one of the ways you sell it.
right, right.
Ours is fairly small, but it's big to us.
How important, especially to the smaller cities, I mean, how important would a LAP program do? Kicking some of these dollars back for, projects that support transit or support, your transportation system. Is that something that sells it on a vote?
I think it does to me. Yes.
So maybe the 5/8 is where, down the middle here, that's kind of would be your target. Because that would certainly be a healthy system and give you some money to kick back to the cities. At least at 100,000 feet.
Yeah, there's an opportunity to lump in, if you wanted to stick with municipal boundaries, there's an opportunity to lump in active transportation, sidewalk and bike paths. And then when they say, this is just for transit service we're never gonna use, you say, no, this is for everyone, it's gonna impact everything. And whether you're a recreational rider, commuter, or it's just your kids. And it gets back, if we did I know MAPS is the Oklahoma City brand, but whatever it is, if it's for healthy movement, healthy mobility, whatever it is, you could connect it to a real public health effort there, so that's.
I would disagree with you. I'd
Okay.
say that if it's money for transit, you better just stick with transit and better stay in one place.
Well, Ron, I would agree with you to a point, but at the same time, Blair brings up a good point. And just like our 0.55 penny that we asked for on our wastewater treatment facility, we stuck 27% of it is gonna run with the graph from now on. But everybody realized they were getting a part of that 27% and they're part of the city, no matter what. And we passed by, 92%. Because everybody knew they were getting something out of it. And we had a 6-year sunset, or 12-year sunset on the remaining part of it. And so I think or at least in our city, it seems like it's an easier sell that way. When everybody thinks they're getting something for what they're fixing to pay out of their pockets.
Well, and it's not like the LAP funds are non-transit connected. You could have an instance where you have a station in a TOD development and you have LAP funds that go toward sidewalks and the ability to get people from nearby local neighborhoods to that station. And that's, I think it would be real conducive to selling it and also providing a function for the service for the people there. So that makes sense in that kind of framework.
Yeah, I agree, though. I certainly don't want it to undermine the effort to actually get the system that.
Yeah.
So.
But it does say something about if you vote the tax in, you're voting the tax in for the transit system. But to the extent some of those dollars are spent in your community to help support that transit system, that's not a bad thing. Where you specifically see those improvements to your stations and your stops. We're talking not all going specifically to a train or to a bus or to.
Especially on a long-term build-out.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it offsets this national concern that's going to arise of this regional issue where suddenly we're doing something we've never done before. And to be able to reinforce it by saying, but, this is how we're going to benefit, brings it back home instead of going over.
So that's all I had. Just throw that out there.
All right, Brian, thanks very much. So like you put on a lot of hats to come up with all of that.
And we're holding you to